So what that means is you're taking the best of all possible worlds of the source text, in this case it's Spanish, all the Spanish translations, and making a hybrid that represents best what you think as the consultant, what this translator should be looking at to make a quality translation. And this is to streamline the whole process. Obviously, he could have all three of these translations open at any time, but that takes a lot of work that he's not as trained as you are to do. As in my case, I or my wife am to do, and to make complex decisions about text critical issues, and also the Hebrew range of meaning in different places, especially when poetry crops up. For the most part, it's not too difficult because it is narrative, but knowing how the Fang language works helps me also streamline smooth out some of the things here that happen in Spanish, so that he's not trying too hard to internalize it. Or he's not running into obstacles. So here I've got Reina Valera 95, Dios habla hoy, and NIV. Sometimes I look at Reina Valera 60, but usually I'll use this as my base text, so I'll copy the whole book and I'll paste it into Word, and I will save it as a web page. Why as a web page? Because as a web page, it's easy to open in a web browser later when he's working on the translation, and without a bunch of tools and extra things at the top, you can have a clean page of text, and you can zoom in and out very easily, holding down Control and using the wheel on the mouse, and the text automatically wraps, which it does not automatically do in Word usually, depending on your version, if it's a normal Word doc. So save it as a web page, and then you go through and you're comparing the versions, comparing it with English, comparing it with the most received, the most well-known version here, which is the Reina Valera 60, as well, to make sure it's not too far from that, so that people don't start thinking, oh, this isn't a good translation. In some cases you have to, obviously, but every version has its different strong points, right? So Dios habla hoy has its strong point. It really smooths out the narrative in a lot of places. But then when it gets to poetry, like in this case, chapter 2 with Hannah's song, there's a lot of terrible things that go on that could be better. So in a lot of those cases, I prefer the NIV's version there. So, and then I got my Hebrew up here to compare, and basically this is a very tedious process to go through the text and make sure everything is good and smoothed out. Sometimes, for instance, the Spanish, the modern translations change certain names that are key names that shouldn't be changed for people who are already used to a tradition of a certain name, of a well-known character. Some of them aren't well-known, so it doesn't matter as much. I'm not sure why they do this, but they do it sometimes, and sometimes you have to catch those things. So when I make notes for the translator to look at, sometimes I'm saying, okay, the Hebrew says literally this. Why? Because a lot of times the Fang actually sounds more like the Hebrew, and if they don't get a chance to hear what the Hebrew says literally, they can't actually have the opportunity in their own language where it might actually overlap perfectly with the Hebrew language to use that idiom or that turn of phrase. And it's actually surprising how much this language, Fang, has in common with Hebrew culture and sometimes the Hebrew language. Sometimes I'll also talk about the different versions and why they have that in these notes. Sometimes I'll just say, here's another way of saying this. Here also in Logos, I've got the UBS handbook on for Samuel, and so this gives some notes that sometimes I'll translate for him and put in a footnote. Sometimes I'll give a suggestion for what kind of idiom he should try to get in Fang across at this point to try to communicate what the idea is in Hebrew. then sometimes I'll just talk about something that's ambiguous and why it's ambiguous, and give him the freedom to leave it ambiguous. There's a million different instances and ideas of what could end up in these footnotes. So he has all of this at his disposal when he's going, so it's a streamlined way of looking at the text while he's internalizing it to record the audio adaptation. So that's the front translation process in a nutshell. Welcome to my office setup. So this is the recording studio. This is why we've got mattresses here, mattress here with some nice dinosaurs on it, and then lots of books. This helps mute the sound. So we use these Logitech headsets, noise canceling headsets. I've wrapped a little piece of extra foam around the microphone there, and that helps a little bit. Now, one thing to know about these headsets, and I've done a lot of research on this, and I've suffered a lot of grief from these issues, is that these are not insulated. And so I guess the USB connection or something picks up electromagnetic flux. So electromagnetic flux effects come from things like these adapters, these things, and especially voltage regulators like this one. And so basically, if you don't want to have a low hum in the background while you're recording with one of these, number one, you have to unplug it here. Then you have to turn off any regulator that's in the room nearby and unplug the regulator. So it's not just enough to turn off the regulator. If there's any current coming in through the regulator, then it will have some kind of low buzz in the background or hum. And so that's something that's impossible to deal with otherwise. There's no way to get some kind of insulation or grounding that will get around that. Believe me, I've done hundreds of hours of research, it feels like, to try to find this online, any kind of solution that would allow me to leave this laptop plugged in while we're recording. So basically, when the translator is internalizing a text, we turn this back on, we plug it in, and then once he's ready to record, we unplug it. Now, what I recommend is having one of these silicon keyboards. So it's a floppy, you can roll it up, but when you press in the space bar, it doesn't make any sound. And why is that an advantage? Because the click is actually audible when you use this software. It picks it up. It may be very minute, but it still picks it up, and the silicon option avoids that. So this is for recording the narration. Then I've got an H2 Zoom mic. It's got the wind screen on it right now, but this Zoom H2 is fantastic for recording instruments and other things that you'll see later. One thing that I forgot to mention is that these Zoom recorders are insulated, or because they're analog, see I have an analog cable, that red cable going into it, it doesn't pick up any kind of electromagnetic flux when you have other things plugged in and like this regulator there and stuff. So that's one of the nice things. And so I don't have to, I can keep this computer plugged in, all of these things on the sound card here. Any mics I plug in that are analog are totally fine. But as soon as I plug in this digital USB headset, that I can have nothing plugged in or on around it when I'm recording. I want to stress that because it's a perennial problem that probably is causing a lot of people headaches, and it's very hard to find things online that are dealing with this problem and with any kind of clear solutions or information about it. So be careful with these digital. It's nice that they're digital, straight to digital USB, and that they're noise canceling headsets and they're affordable. But honestly, if there was any other way around it, I would ditch them in a second so that I wouldn't have to unplug everything every time I recorded. Right here, I've got a good old Dell Windows XP computer with an old Creative sound card that is actually the best sound card I've ever used, and you can't get them anymore. That's why I still use XP. And so this setup is right here, and I'm going to screen capture this and talk a little bit more about what we're seeing on this screen. Besides that, I've got an external keyboard here plugged into that computer, and then I've got Creative speakers here with a subwoofer down here to get some good volume and good sound while mixing. These speakers, actually, I bought them at Walmart for $15 maybe 12 years ago, and they still work perfectly. Like they sound like studio monitors. They're amazing. So I highly recommend it. I've done hundreds of recordings using these for my final mixings, and they work great. So that's a little overview of our physical setup, and now let's go into the screenshots. Okay, so let's talk about this stage in the recording process when you're trying to get your text that you developed in your front translation into paratext and then to hear this. So on this computer I'm using paratext 7.5, and that makes things a little easier for this. You don't have to open any projects online. And so I've created a new project here. It's called FBA. I'm not syncing it in the cloud. It's just a local project to be able to paste the front translation in so that here this can read off of it. So here I've got Genesis. So what I did was I took this front translation prepared by my wife, and with all the nice footnotes and picture helps and stuff, and I've pasted that into paratext in 3 parts. So basically, it doesn't have to be complicated. I just copied and pasted a third of it into verse 1 of chapter 1, and that's it. Here, this is just going to divide it up by phrases using periods. So then chapter 2, I've got another section. It actually jumps to chapter 16. So it's got all of that here. And then chapter 3 has the rest. So when we save this, go ahead and close out of this. If you open it up and hear this, you can see right here the 3 chapters. And you can see here that we've done some of the Joseph story. Or all of the Joseph story already. Now, how this works is you have in the first chapter 463 blocks. So it's quite a lot, but that way when you export, you have only 3 files. They're somewhat large files, but it's a lot easier to edit those all in the digital audio workstation without having to import a million files and put them all together. So that makes it easier. So this is what we do. Our workflow is this is basically you have on one side here this, on this side you have the text. So the translator will do internalization on this chunk of text, usually what can fit more or less on the screen without having to scroll down, depending on the text size. And so we'll put the marker here, the recording marker, on the first phrase within that section. So if, for instance, we've recorded that first section, now we're going to start with verse 7 here, well then we will go to find verse 7, and that is a guide for us to know, okay, if we need to go back and make corrections on a section, then we just go back and we look for the beginning of that section. We know it began with this and was somewhere in this realm, right? So that way it allows the translator to have a lot more time and a lot more naturalness go into his narration because he's doing larger chunks. Because I know that here this wasn't designed for this, but instead of using a program like Render, which requires a lot of permissions and also doesn't give you the full flexibility, it's pretty locked down compared to what you can do with Hear This. You can just do Hear This and do the same thing and combine the best of both worlds, orality and text, for those translators who also are good readers, and so that's really helpful. And so that's the way our workflow goes with this side of the translation process. So we just work our way down. So these obviously will only have little dots. So if you look at, for instance, our our Jonah project here, we've got the little blue completed blocks are spaced out here because we were doing it in bigger sections. And Hear This stitches it all together just as if it were all filled in. It doesn't matter. So there's no problem with Hear This when you're exporting it. It's just totally normal and it works like a charm. So anyway, I'd encourage you to try this out, experiment with this, and see what kinds of other ideas you can come up with, and would love to hear your comments on this whole process. Obviously, this isn't an orality workshop, so we're not talking about all the ways that we use to do internalization of the text, but this is talking about the tools and the workflow. So thanks for watching.
Okay, welcome to a blast from the past. This is Windows XP. I bet some people feel a lot of nostalgia looking at this. This is a little overview of my layout. I'm using Acid Pro by Sony. This is 4.0. It's really old, but it works. And obviously it's not as efficient as other DAWs, but it is what it is. So let's look at what we've got here. First of all, we've got on the top here what we call the compás, or the metronome, which is actually something they use traditionally with the troubadour style. So you're going to hear this. I'll play it for you soloed. This goes on throughout the whole epic or story. So that's what people will do live. You'll have people in the audience with these little pieces of bamboo, and they'll be banging these together in rhythm. And then they'll also have this bottle. So this is interesting. So you hear that along with the bamboo, and that keeps going as a constant throughout the narration. So altogether, it sounds more or less like this. So then we've got all these tracks. So as you can see, there's at least, almost 70 tracks. And what are we doing here? First of all, as the introduction, we've got this theme song, which introduces all of our works. So as this is the Book of Judges, and this song introduces the name, the symbolism of the name in Gualong in Fang, and what that means, and why the group is called this. And then it starts with what we call an attention getter in English, or there's various things that this accomplishes, but basically it's a call and response. So here's the first one. Let's play it for you. And oops, let's go back. So you hear him say something, and then there's the crowd chimes in. So we have all of these pre-recorded responses. So here's the folder that I have of attention getters that we've recorded with groups, small and large. And they each have their own meaning. Some of them are nonsense phrases, but they are used for different discourse purposes throughout the whole narration. So sometimes if it's a long, potentially boring part of the story, he'll intersperse those. And so since he's doing the narration and hear this and not in front of a live audience, we have these things to drop in. So here's another one. So then you have in the background these music tracks. So what we did was we took some time and recorded all this mood music. So in this folder, I've got xylophones and the traditional Fang guitar, different tracks that have different tones, or like sad, or here's a sad xylophone, here's a danger xylophone. Here's a mysterious guitar. This is traditional Fang guitar, which is a very bizarre instrument. And so here's what it sounds like if I play this mysterious guitar. A little bit of it. Anyway, so I have all of these now to be able to drop in here for the different sections of the story. So here we've got a cool thing. What we did was every time in Judges where the people of Israel turn away from the Lord, we have a certain xylophone music that comes in. Here I've got it labeled as the sound of disobedience. And so every time that refrain comes through in the book, you hear this. So in this culture, that sounds like something bad, or in this case, this is actually the soundtrack for part of the Exodus when it was the plague of death. Then we've got every time the people of Israel cry out to the Lord because of the oppression of their enemies, we have this that we recorded in a big church, and so you'll hear this fade in and out throughout the narrative whenever this happens. So it's a bunch of people crying out in Fang for Yahweh to rescue them. So then we've got a lot of sound effects. So basically, as the story goes along, I've got markers up here that let me know where I'm tracking in the story. And so, for instance, here I know that it's chapter 4, and here's where Deborah comes into the story, and she's got some music, some special music. We've got a special song. So after chapter 5, or actually right before chapter 5, the long poem or song of Deborah and Barak. We actually have a shorter version in song, so it comes in here. So first, the first part of the song, you hear Barak singing, and then you hear Deborah singing. So that's a lot of fun. Let's see how we're doing with the time here. Okay, we got a couple more minutes. So then I've got some other notes. For instance, when Jael strikes Sisera and kills him, well, we have sound for that. So this is what it sounds like. So there's a lot of onomatopoeia sounds in Fang that the narrator uses, but then we also insert sound effects. So here we go. So that was another strike, and here's another one. So anyway, it's subtle, but it works. Then we've got a lot of different music that we've taken from, like, for instance, the Song of Deborah that you just heard. Sometimes we'll strip, like from the Book of Ruth, we had several songs, so we'll strip out the voices and just export the tracks of the music, and then we can use that for different parts of these recordings as background music. So yeah. We have, like, for instance, when I think it's right here, when Gideon is making the sacrifice before the messenger of Yahweh comes, then you hear this. Well, first he's pulling down the altar, destroying it, and then you have some other effects when he lights this fire and the angel of the Lord goes up in the flame. So in creating the soundscape for the scene where Abimelech is attacking the city and the woman throws a millstone down on his head, I have right here a sound of medieval battle. So right here I'll solo it, and this fades in. So all together, so you'll hear the impact of the millstone. So let's listen to how this all blends together. Here we go. All right, so that's a little preview. You can tell he's a really interesting person to listen to. Definitely excited about what he's recording, and makes it sound exciting. So anyway, this is some more of the guides that I have set up here. Here I've got marked where Jephthah's daughter comes out to him, and so obviously we want to insert some music that's appropriate for that. There's actually in the Fang culture a xylophone sound that's like the sound of mourning or sadness, especially when somebody dies. And so in this part, we've put this, dropped this in here as a background, so you can hear what it sounds like by itself. So that will be going on in the background. So anyway, that's what all these tracks do, and then we can export these files as MP3s, and I'll show you the process that goes into that afterwards.
What about getting sound effects? How do you get some good sound effects? And one of the ways to do that is by going to YouTube, and then you can search like fire sounds. and once something comes up, you can choose from all of these things. Usually they're royalty free or not copyrighted, and so you just hit play on one of these videos. Some of them are like 6 hours. Like here you got 6 hours of fire sounds and stuff right here, and you hit play and you open up Audacity, and then you just hit record once you've selected what you want to record with. And in this case, you want to be the Windows WASAPI, and that will record only what's going in that's being played and not from your microphones. So you just hit record while it's playing, and then you export it as an MP3, and you're done. So that's how you get sound effects. Now, what about when you have finished exporting your MP3 of the whole audio production? Let's say, in this case, the book of Joshua, the oral adaptation of Joshua. So, first off, you need a cover for it, album art. So, here's what my wife painted, and we put in the shadow with the Hebrew. It's pretty cool. And so basically, this is the full res image. What you want to do is resize it. So Control Alt I. Let's resize the image to 72 dpi and to 600, which is the typical size for album art on CD embedded artwork. So I think nowadays people are going with higher pixels for that, but this is good for my context. So now if I hit Control Alt 0, I get to see the full size. I've got a 1080p screen, so that's why it looks a little small. And then I can hit Control Alt S to save as, and then I can save it as the Joshua icon, which I've already done, so I'm not going to do that again. So then I can go to this program called MP3 Tag. It's a free program. Highly recommend it. It's a lifesaver. So here I've got my list of different things, different files. So here's the Joshua file. And you can see over here that I've already got it tagged. I've got the album art here. I've got the album artist, the album itself, the title, and then the website and the comments. And you can put whatever you want. There's other fields that you can add as well. But those are the main ones that I want, so we're good. And what's great about this program is you can right-click, say, okay, all of these, most of this information I want to transfer to the new file that I've brought in. So I can do tag copy, and then I can go to the new file. Let's say this is a new file, and hit tag paste. So all that information will be pasted onto here, and that way, and then I can just edit the little things. Like if I don't want this cover, I can hit remove cover and then drag and drop from my Joshua folder. Here's my Joshua icon. I can just drag and drop right into the space and then hit save right here, and then it's it. So this is awesome because then once I play this file, so let's open up this file here. Once I play this, it's going to show up with this cool cover right there, and all the information is going to be embedded when someone plays it on their phone. So that's how to do these things at this stage of the project. Thanks for watching.